Doctors of Reddit, what patient made you go how the duck are you even alive? We had a guy with a major aortic dissection one night. From the bedside ultrasound, he looked like he had already bled out. He had some chest pain, but he was alert and oriented, and we were shocked he was even still alive. He absolutely shouldn't have been with how much blood we saw, and the size of the dissection. We called the surgeon in, who was really blunt, and explained to the guy he was probably going to die in surgery. He was a young guy, like late 40s. He was on a business trip, and it was completely unexpected. He kept trying to call his wife, but it was like 2 AM and she wasn't answering. He just wanted to talk and tell her goodbye. It was actually pretty devastating to watch. Meanwhile he's so coherent and alert, as if he isn't actively bleeding out and dying. Most patients we would get in the same situation wouldn't be conscious, or would already be dead. They swooped him off to surgery before he could contact his wife, and the dude lived. Remembering that story got me through a lot of tough years in the year, because I think it just reminded me that hope and good outcomes are still out there. My favorite bit about this story is you called someone in their late 40s a young guy. As feel good as this story is, you've just made a bunch of other random people very happy. When I turned 30, my little brother told me don't worry about it. If your life was a Wikipedia article you'd still be in the early life section. That actually helped a lot. Imagine my surprise at learning that at 34 I'm not old enough to be considered a young guy yet. Your 30s are definitely your late teens of adulthood. Enjoyed my friend. Practically a teenager still. Is he even out of his diapers yet? I can still smell the placenta. Lady in her mid-30s was in the clinic for a 1-week follow-up post-foot amputation, diabetes. She was admitted straight from the clinic because her blood glucose was 600 mg/dl. Normal is 80 to 120, and the wound was severely infected. We used super concentrated doses of insulin to bring it back to the 200s. She was on strict diet restrictions and we couldn't figure out how it wouldn't drop any lower than 250. Turns out her kids, teens, had been sneaking giant 64-ounce sodas and candy bars into the hospital, literally 1 week after we chopped her foot off because of uncontrolled diabetes. Not exactly a case of how the duck did you survive that trauma/disease, but how the duck do you even function on your own. My wife's father died due to diabetes complications. He'd been in and out of the hospital for several years. He went in on a Friday, they amputated toes on Sunday, he was dead on Monday. Nobody was prepared, but nobody was surprised either. When we went to his apartment to clean it out, and there was candy everywhere. Under couch cushions, pillows, in his bed, in all of the cupboards. I have a sweet tooth and I can't imagine wanting this much candy. The man killed himself. I have gotten my sign to stop. I like my toes and my life, and have a huge history of family with diabetes. What's awesome about cutting sugar is that not only do you want it less like a month later, you may be like me, and find most stuff hella gross later on. I work in trauma and once had a guy fall off a roof. He said he remembered hitting the bars on the scaffolding on the way down. We originally thought he'd fractured his femur, but nope, just a small hematoma. He was in bed next to a man who had broken his ribs and had a small C-spine fracture when he fell forward picking up his keys. The duality of man. One of these men ate his vegetables. One of these men drank his milk. A friend of mine had to get his entire leg amputated because he slipped off the bottom step of a ladder and bent his knee backwards. It apparently pinched some type of main blood vessel as his entire leg eventually got necrosis. When they had him in the hospital, they tried to helicopter him to some other hospital, but there were high winds, so they had him sitting there with the necrosis spreading over a stupid 1-foot slip. Another thing to stress about. Awesome. God, that's horrifying, and I would be so pissed for the rest of my life. Pissed that how such a stupid small thing would completely alter my life and cause me to go through all that horribleness. And also pissed that I wouldn't at least have a good story to tell when people asked what happened to my leg. The human body is ducking fascinating. Infuriating, more like. A guy I took care of during my residency, fucking cyborg. I was the chief on trauma. Got a page about a patient en route with a stab wound to the chest. When the patient rolled into the trauma bay, he had no pulse. He had been stabbed in his left upper chest, 3 centimeters below clavicle. He got an earthoracotomy. If you want to feel like a badass, then do an earthoracotomy. We were able to cross-clamp his aorta. We took him right to the OR. We oversewed one small artery below his rib, then transported him to the ICU still intubated. 8 hours later he was extubated and wanting breakfast. Seriously, dude? He was dead 10 hours before. He was also a complete asshole. No wonder someone stabbed him. Nurse turns to the doctor. Can we unsave this one? Where's the unsave button? The neck. Gotta give it a good twist though. Well, he was probably having an off day because of the whole stabbing thing. I'd be cranky too. It's always wise to be extra nice to nurses and police officers. Lol. Reminds me of my army days. The unwritten rule was never fuck with the MPs, the cooks, the medics, or the guys in finance. Each one of those specialties can really make your day go bad. A guy, now passed away, who had incurable lung cancer from Agent Orange exposure during infantry service in Vietnam, and his wife had recently died. Cancer. Wife died. Guy was pretty positive, glass half full about chemo considering the double whammy. Asked him how he managed to keep it on the positive. He said he was returning to base with just days left on his enlistment. Rookie pilot has a mechanical failure of some sort in their Hawaii. They are going down, and not the controlled kind of landing either. He assumes he is about to die, says everything got real slow, real bright, and a sense of acceptance and peace washed over him. Rookie pulls one out at the last moment, lands their bird with no casualties. Patient told me he felt he should have died that day, and every single day since was a complete gift. Maybe being alive has a lot to do with attitude. I believe it. My uncle survived 3 ambushes in Vietnam. He's a real believer in faith and God. Because of it. My dad was there, to him not so much. I was in the military myself, and deployed 2 times, and I seen some combat, and I guess it's how close you come, and your outlook on life. I remember thinking at the end of April 2004, my first full month in theater, that month would be the hardest of my life and that everything else in life would be cake. I was in theater for another 11 months and deployed again, but nothing was quite the balls to a belt sander that month was. That's wild, man. I'm always so curious about life in combat. In the movies the soldiers always seem so calm and collected, but from other people's accounts, that it's the complete opposite. Is that true? It just made me realize the crazy shit people are capable of, and what kind of monsters they can be. I study psychology. We always talk about how attitude changes so many things. There are studies showing that patients with optimistic and hopeful/positive attitudes during chemo have higher success rates. This applies to so many different aspects of life. I'm a full believer in this. Patient here. When I was 2, I was being treated for asthma due to wheezing, labored breathing, etc. One night it got exceptionally bad, so my mom took me to the ER. They put me face down to do a cord scan. This was 1990, and when they were done, they turned me back over, and I was blue, had stopped breathing. Cord revealed a volleyball-size mass in my chest. Emergency surgery revealed the mass was what would have been my twin. It kept growing inside my rib cage and finally had nowhere to go in my toddler body, so it cut off my airway. It had fingernails, hair, appendages, everything but major organs. Made a full recovery. Healthy 31-year-old now. Zero asthma. Only remnant of that night is a scar that goes from the center of my chest to the center of my back. What the duck? Yep, it's called fetus in fetu. I'm not a doctor, but I did meet a patient who fell from a 5-story building, landed on his upper back, woke up in the hospital the next morning, and got up walking around like nothing ever happened. Barely a scratch on him. Think about it every time I'm in a building with at least 5 stories, just looking down like, how in the world did this guy walk away from that like he fell off his bike and took a nap? Actually, I've seen worse injuries from someone falling off a bike, lol. Airlifted pregnant female with GSW to the head. Arrived intubated and non-responsive with the bullet lodged in her right occipital lobe. Self-extubated the next day and left the hospital against medical advice 2 days after that with only minor visual deficits. Unbelievable. She was no lady, she is a Terminator. More badass than a Terminator. She was Sarah Connor. Actually this makes sense. Pregnant with John. She gets shot in the head by a Terminator. She then flees the hospital before it tracks her down. My mom's a doctor. I asked her about this when it came up on Reddit. When my mom was in her IQ cycle during internship, man with police officers behind him came in the IQ. The man was perfectly fine and walking, so my mom and her colleagues were confused. The officers showed them a picture of a crumpled metal piece, which was a car. It didn't look like a car at all, just metal trash. The officers told my mom and her colleagues that they rescued a patient from the car, which was lit on fire only a few seconds after they rescued him. The patient didn't have a single scar on him, was perfectly fine, and got his name around the hospital for being immortal. My siblings and I all walked away from a car crash where our hatchback flipped upside down and backwards on the highway. Car was totaled. Ambulance guys couldn't believe we'd walked out of it. Seatbelts save lives. My mom and my sister did the same thing in a car that was over 10 years old. My mom had the satisfaction of getting out of the car and screaming bloody murder at the teenager who blew through the stop sign and T-boned them. That kid got a double whammy of thinking she'd killed people and then getting yelled at by a crazy person. This has me howling. I'm just picturing the shock and horror on people's faces after witnessing what they likely thought was someone dying, only for your mom to crawl out, dust herself off, and start laying into other driver. Are you fucking stupid? I'm happy to hear that they were okay.